I'm going to tell you what I know and what I experienced personally. Those of you who've been with me before know that for over 25 years I worked in the government. And I was involved in the Montauk Project from 1970 to 1983, which involved mind control and genetic manipulation, and even such topics as bizarre as time travel and interstellar weaponry. All of these things are true and really occur on this planet and elsewhere, and most of the population doesn't know anything about it. But what I want to begin with tonight is a story that I lived through for the last 2 years that touched me very personally and nearly destroyed my entire life. And it involved a person whom I met in Orlando, Florida. And this woman attended my very first seminar in Orlando. And in fact, her name was the first one on the list of guests because last name started with an A. And I was working at that time with an East Indian person who was doing my sponsoring work in the Orlando area. And he had been a client of mine and then asked if I'd be willing to do seminars in that area. And he, in turn, was networking with this woman who was a friend of his. And she claimed that she was the one who got a lot of the people to attend that seminar. And there was quite a few people at that seminar, which was actually held at a Catholic seminary called San Pedro, just outside of Orlando. Now, that was the first time I ever met her. That very first day, she kind of latched on to me. Told me stories about how she was a Cherokee and Blackfoot Indian, as well as having Irish genetics as well, and that she was very much aware of what was going on with the world situation and who was controlling the world. And that very first time I met her, there was a recognition. I remembered something about her from the past. And a lot of it had to do with the Montauk Project. Montauk Project used women specifically for breeding purposes and for controlling purposes. Very often, they would have programmed males under the jurisdiction of a very aggressive female who would be their handler or controller. The second time I came to Orlando, 3 months later, she became much more aggressive in her connection to me. And in fact, she had been calling me on the telephone on and off for those past couple of months. And she would say words and say things that triggered information in my own head. Things which I never knew that I even could remember, that involved ritual ceremony and what I have come to know as reptilian religious programming, which is something I'll get into a little bit later. To make a long story short, she managed to take over the control of the Orlando seminars and all of the Florida programs that I handled there. She took them over from this East Indian person, and she became quite attached to me. She told me that she knew that there was a crop of programmed people out there, that I was one of, who were being prepared for a certain position in the global order. She also told me that she was very proud of her reptilian heritage, and that she had killed people and murdered people to get to where she was at this present time. Now, a normal person would have reacted a little differently than I did. A normal person would have said, what kind of woman is this who admits to being a killer and controlling people and knowing secret information, and this person's latching on to me? And yet I didn't do anything about it, and yet I encouraged her to continue doing my programming for me and sponsoring me and promoting me. It wasn't until January of this year that she became blatantly aggressive, to the point where she completely took over my business, where she took away work from my wife Janet, who was handling my work at that time, and actually got me to the position where I was totally removed and isolated from my family. She had me, and I helped with this, by the way, so I take responsibility. She had me traveling to all the continents of the earth under her jurisdiction, traveling to Illuminati sites and activities where severe ritual and ceremony had taken place where I was concerned, knowing that at those places I would become activated and certain memories would come to the surface. During this time, she also drugged me. I have 18 needle holes in my back. I didn't know I was being drugged at the time. She would also slip pills into my mouth at night while I was semi-conscious. She also carried a weapon with her that was loaded at all times. She threatened to kill my wife, my family, and my children, and told me that I had to do everything that she wanted me to do, otherwise I would also be eliminated. Part of me, an underlying part of me, kept saying, I need to get out of here. I need to be removed from this person. But a surface part of me went along with it. It was almost as if I was a prisoner within my own mind. And there was programming techniques that she would do which were part of what a handler would do to people. For example, she would keep the room very hot, then she would keep it very cold. She would give me a lot of food, then she would give me no food. Deprivation and the antithesis of deprivation. That's a programming technique. Drugging someone, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, saying keywords, memories, etc. She had me going to Montauk Point, actually talking to the security guards and letting us get into the property, taking me to the building where I had been kept, activating certain sequences, then had a security guard make sure that we got out safely through a back exit. She introduced me to people. I did a lot of work in California, introduced me to people in California who are closely connected to Hollywood and closely connected to political organizations. She would have me meet other people who were involved in the same programming as I am. I can't mention their names here in public because I don't think they would appreciate it, but you've heard of all of them. Some of them are very well-known authors and public figures. Also involved in blood ritual and reptilian ceremony. She had me meet, and I can mention this person's name, a woman by the name of Arizona Wilder. You may have read about her in some of David Icke's books. She was a programmed sex slave along the lines of Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor. Arizona Wilder remembered me, and I remembered her. She was called the mother goddess in the reptilian ceremony. She had a very high position, one in which there was ritualistic killing of infants, animals, and adults. And she remembered me being in positions like that at Montauk and in other areas of the world. One of the places that I was sent to was Buenos Aires. And in the palace of Evita Perón, on the basement of this area, there is a vast chamber where these ceremonies take place. A symbol of some of these ceremonies is a winged lion. And if you go to the Congress building of Argentina, the entire building is ringed with gold winged lions. She also had me go, and we traveled throughout Europe, Switzerland, Germany, Norway, Sweden. In every place, she destroyed my business. Where she told me she was going to promote me and change things, she eliminated things and cut people off. We wound up at a concentration camp in East Germany. Very strange things going on there. We walked into the room that was given to us. There were still bloodstains on the floor and on the walls. The light would go on and off. She would speak to the light and it would stop. She knew information about me that I never told anybody ever. The only way she could have known this information is if it were given to her. Yes.
I'm sorry, is this she being Arizona Wilder?
No, this other woman. Yeah. Arizona Wilder was someone that I was introduced to with this woman. She also got me to the point where I truly believed that I would be selected for this role that she said I was going to play in the New World Order. She told me that I was a member of the Illuminati and that my genetics were chosen for that purpose. She also took me to an astrologer in Palm Desert, California, an astrologer who's very well known to Hollywood people and to other people in that area. She used a false birth date. When the astrologer, of course, she had that on her driver's license and used it officially. But when she ran that birth date through the astrologer's computer and ran my birth date through the astrologer's computer, it came out that she was my exact opposite, as if she was my balance. The only way that could possibly be true is if it was already figured out way in advance of her getting these identifications. She also ran what I would call halfway houses in the Orlando area for people who came out of prison, prostitutes, drug addicts, alcoholics, deep criminals, people who she housed and took care of, but yet would not take any state funding or federal funding. She had her own rules, her own regulations. She knew all the police officers. She knew all the judges. She knew all legal aspects of what she was doing, and she would never let anyone know what was going on in her business. She told me that she was closing her business to take over my business, and that I had an obligation to her. And to make a long story short, she even told me that she was pregnant with my children. She said that she miscarried my twins and showed me the fetuses. It was quite a horrific experience. Of course, at the time, my wife knew nothing about that part of the relationship. Finally, we wound up in Anchorage, Alaska. She had the phones cut off. I could not communicate with my family. She would not let any phone calls through. She told my wife that I was divorcing her and marrying her, and that at that point, she told me if I go back to my children and to my family, she'd make sure that they were all killed. This is what I was living with for the last 6 months, mostly over the last 2 years, but particularly the last 6 months. Couldn't tell anybody about it, couldn't speak about it in public. The one thing that really hooked me into her, that made me think and believe that she was telling me the truth about everything, was a particular item that I never spoke about to anybody, and that is the beings who created the reptilians. Those of you who have been with me before know that when I do my DNA seminar, the second day of the first grouping of seminars, and I talk about galactic history, I talk about how the reptilians were the first colonists on this earth and how they destroyed human civilizations elsewhere. I also mentioned to all of you that nobody knew who created them, but it was believed they were not natural to this time-space continuum. Well, when I was a child, there used to be these beings that would come into my bedroom, and I used to call them the clear people. They looked almost like a human form. They were about 6 feet tall, but you could see through them. You could see the veins and the arteries and what looked like organs, but not human organs. They had no face, really, just an empty spot surrounded by this clear membrane. And they would walk and move like a person. One evening, my sister happened to be looking out of her bedroom door, because her door faced the hallway where we used to sleep as children, and saw my bedroom door, and she saw one of these beings walking out of my room and then evaporating in the hallway. It was just after an incident that I had had, waking up and seeing that creature standing over me. And they used to program me or talk to me, where I would get up in the middle of the night, go to my closet door and open it, and there they would be standing there. And if I entered into that space, it was like entering into another dimension, filled with them. They were like gelatinous beings, and I called them clear people. Never spoke about this to a living soul. Not my wife, not my family, only my sister, because she said, I saw a strange thing last night, and I said, that's funny, I had a dream about that. And that was as far as it went. And yet when I met this woman, a year and a half after meeting her, she started talking to me about the clear people, or the transparent people. And it just boggled my mind to think that she knew about such things. That was a very deep secret that I knew I was never supposed to talk about. These are the creatures, the beings, who genetically created the reptilian races. This is the first time I've ever mentioned this ever in public. And the reason that I'm doing this tonight, especially because it's being taped, is because I want a record of what I'm saying to you on tape and on audio in case something does happen to me, or in case something does come up in the future where she does something. At least all of you know, and it's on tape what I'm telling you and the date that it was recorded. And I'm going to get more into these transparent people in a little bit. But I want to tell all of you that I myself, despite my abilities, despite what I know, was deceived and allowed this to happen to me. And so it took a great effort for me to even be able to say all of this in public to all of you and to have it taped. When I left Anchorage, Alaska, I was going to go back to Orlando with this woman. She told me that she wanted me to go straight back to Orlando with her. In the meantime, she had set up a bank account in Anchorage under her first name and my last name as if we were married. She also had me go to the Motor Vehicle Bureau to apply for an Alaska driver's license. She was going to have me completely dissociated from my family and from everywhere that I lived. On the way back, I told her I had to see my children one last time. And she told me questions that she said, your family will try to get you back. They will try to make you not come back with me. And she would question me to see how I'm going to answer. And I gave her all the right answers. Thank God, something within me started changing. And I was afraid to go home. I thought, what will they do to me when I get there? What will I say? I hadn't been home in weeks. She went to Orlando, and I took a taxi back home. And I stayed outside for quite a while because I was afraid to go inside. But I finally walked in the door, and when I did, it was like coming out of a coma. That's the only way I can explain it. It was like walking out of one heavy, dense environment and walking into something that was open and clear, and I could breathe. And I remember walking into my hallway and then walking into the living room, and then my wife came down, the children came down, and it was like I had been sleeping a very long time, and I just woke up. And I had this weird dream. And it was a very strange sensation. And it took from that time, which was just last month, the middle of July, all the way till now, for me to really start coming back to myself and remembering everything that just happened to me in the last 2 years, and especially the last 6 months. I had traveled over 160,000 miles. I had gone to I don't know how many countries. I think I passed through 49 states, all getting away from my family, being segregated for this job that she claimed that they had for me. And then the interesting or bizarre thing, of course everything I'm telling you must be bizarre to all of you, but I saw this woman shift in front of my eyes. I know many of you have heard about shape-shifting people, those who can change from one form to another. But I saw her shift from a human-type person into a reptilian, this far from my face. I also saw her shift into what looked like a very cat-like creature. And on one occasion, I saw her shift into what I can only describe as a hag, an old hag, like an old witch-type person. But most of the time, she would shift into a reptilian. Now, I always knew that these things existed, and I had seen them happen at Montauk, which I will talk about. And by the way, today I'm going to name a lot of names. I'm not naming her name right now because I don't know what she would do if she found out. I know who her targets are now in the future, and I have warned those people. I don't think they believe it, but they'll have to find out for themselves. I wish someone had warned me before she came into my life. But she is the worst of the worst. Those of you who read my book, Alien Connection, know about the section I have about the persona known as Johannes von Gruber. That persona actually is part of me. That person existed in Germany. This woman was his mistress in Germany. And when Johannes disappeared, she was executed. I can only imagine that the reason she was agreed to do this role now was retribution. She's driven. She will kill anybody. She will stop at nothing. She will let nothing get in her way. And I have to deal with that right now, and that's why I did not go to Denver to do global sciences, because she was going to be there. And I knew that if she was there, she could turn on her drugs or her programming, whatever it is she does, as my handler to make me snap back into that position again. And so for my own safety and for my family's safety, so not to be away from them again, I didn't go. And I warned Dean Stonier, who was the head of global sciences. He was warned. He says he understands and was doing his own investigation of this person. I don't know what happened, if she showed up, or what even happened when she was there. I had other people who were friends of mine in California who actually went to see what was going on. I should get a report when I get home. And I just wanted to also apologize to all of you who I've been with before that I allowed this to happen to me when I should have known better and should have been mentally stronger and not allow that programming to come through again. Which leads me to tell you that never assume when you think you have undone something in a mind pattern or programming that it is done forever. The imprint will always be there as long as you're in this lifetime. You must always make conscientious efforts to monitor yourself and look for the triggers that can turn on the old patterns. And you will always be tested by yourself and others to see if you can fall back to those old patterns. And so, I never went back to Orlando, never communicated with the person again, although I know she did try to communicate with me on many different levels. I need to also tell you that she was in communication with not only Arizona Wilder, but also a person known as Cisco Wheeler, who you may have read about in the David Icke material. Cisco Wheeler claims officially to be an Illuminati programmer and also a keeper of information for them. Cisco Wheeler came to visit me in California, and she didn't like me because I didn't agree with some of the stuff she was saying. And she brought with her another gentleman who I won't name right now, who was involved with the Japanese government and the Japanese Illuminati. And this woman who was trying to control me wanted me to go to Japan and talk about the American public and what could be done with them. So, just to let you all know, I'm hopefully back on track now, and I will hopefully never allow any of this to ever happen to me again. But I wanted you to know what happened to me and why I haven't been back to Chicago in almost a year. And that is really, although I take full responsibility, it did have to do with the influence of this person in my life. Yes, sir.
That's your question. And hope I'm not before the floor with this. In the last 6 months, have you given David Icke an interview concerning some things?
Yes, I have. Yes, it's been on the web for quite a while. I'm actually glad you brought that up. David Icke called me because he was interested in information involving the shape-shifting reptilians. There is a substance that these beings leave after they do this ceremony with their shape-shifting, which looks like gelatinous material, either yellow or green slime. That's what it looks like. And he wanted to know what I knew about it, and I told him the information on that. I also told him that during the ceremonies at Montauk Point, when they did their reptilian ritual and ceremony, that I saw two people, one of whom looked like William F. Buckley, and the other one looked like Gardner, the one who wrote the book Holy Grail. Yeah, sorry? No, not Gerald Gardner. Sir Lawrence Gardner, right. Those two people, I saw people who looked like that shift into reptilian form as they performed blood ritual in the ceremony. And he was interested in that, and he was also interested in my DNA information and how someone could logically or scientifically shift, and I explained that to him. And unbeknownst to me, the entire conversation was being taped, and within 10 hours, it was on his website. Embellished a bit, but there it was, and there was nothing I could do about it. Okay? I recently contacted him to warn him about this woman because she's after him too. So I warned everyone I could possibly warn, and now it's up to them. It's like the analogy I gave you the last few times I was here, why even do any of this work now? And that is, if you see someone running towards a cliff with blindfolds on, what do? Do you let them go? Do you just yell at them? I prefer, what makes me comfortable is to physically stop the person, take off their blindfolds and show them the cliff. And then they can do whatever they want. If they want to keep running, they can keep running. But at least I told them there was a cliff there and I showed it to them. So that's what I'm going to do for you tonight, hopefully, is show you the cliff. Hopefully take your blindfold down, but you can put them back on afterwards if you wish. Okay? And I wanted to start out the lecture with this story about what happened to me because it will tie in again at the end when I talk about what the Illuminati plans are for this planet, which are quite heinous and are going on at this moment. It's no longer in the future. You're reading about some of it now in the newspaper. And it's going to get even more progressed as in the next few months and culminate within the next 3 years into a civilization that you didn't expect. Now, I've mentioned a lot of things in the last 45 minutes or so. I've mentioned about the Illuminati, I've mentioned about the reptilians, I've mentioned about Montauk Point, but I need to give you the history or the backup of all of this. And I need to explain to you also about the history of this galaxy, and particularly the solar system, because it's pertinent to what's going on now and will give you an understanding of why the reptilians have the mindset that they do. Now, there was a star system, and some of you may remember this from the DNA seminar that I had here about 1.5 years ago. There was a star system at the center of this galaxy called Lyrae. You can consider Lyrae to be the home of all human civilization in this galaxy. And I mentioned to you that this civilization was very etheric. They were not really very physical, but borderline physical and non-physical. Now, the Lyrians, you can say, were descendant or the promulgation of what you would term angelic figures. As angelic energy descends into physical reality, it gets into a borderline state that the government refers to as ET level. And to refresh your memory, the government makes a distinction between ET and alien. An alien being is a physical being who resides within this physical universe but is not from the earth. And an ET or extraterrestrial is a borderline physical, non-physical being who comes from another dimensional space-time. Now, the reptilians as I mentioned, were not from this galaxy. They appeared in a star system known as Draconis, or Draco. It's commonly referred to as Draco. Originally, I had told you that nobody knew who created them. It was a mystery. But now I can tell you, and I have told you just before, that they were created by what I call the clear people or transparent people. I have to use another pen because this doesn't have much ink in it. These clear people are of the same category as extraterrestrial. They're not physical and not non-physical. They're kind of borderline. They have what I call a hive mentality. In other words, they exist in a sea of intelligence that is of the same genre of creatures they are. There's really no segregation or individuality. However, this sea of intelligence is very intelligent, and it has dissociated itself somewhat from what you would call God mind, or the universal, interuniversal energy that pervades all things, without which nothing else could exist. And in fact, if you want to judge them as evil or bad, I don't use terminology like that. I used to, but not anymore, because I've come to learn that there really is no good or bad or evil or positive, negative. It's just intelligence, and everything is the flip side to the other thing. People ask me, do you believe in God? Yes, I believe in God. Nothing exists without it. And then people ask me, do I believe in religion? And I say no, because I know that all religions were created for mind control purposes. God does not have a religion. So when you ask me what religion am I say whatever God is. That's the religion I am. I believe, and I actually know this, but I'll say believe because I can't prove it to you, that these clear or transparent entities created the reptilians in order to destroy the civilization. They wanted to create their own little universe under their control. They wanted to be God. Now, this woman that I told you about earlier, who was controlling me and handling me, claimed to be from them. And she told me that I was of them as well, and that we were the only two on the earth. And as incredible as this may sound, she almost proved it to me, or maybe she did prove it to me, because she showed me with my own vision, which, by the way, since I've been here last time, I have my eyesight back, that I could shift myself. And on several occasions, I actually shifted into a creature that looked like a winged lion, like the creature I told you about that I saw in Argentina. They were all along the Congressional building. This is what I saw myself become. And on one occasion, it was so powerful I couldn't shift back to human shape again. I can only imagine how this happened through her ritual and ceremony. She used to evoke a being, and maybe some of you have heard of this being, with this name. Abraxas. Have any of you heard of that before? He's heard of it? If any of you have information on this entity, I'd like to know it. The very first time I did my Illuminati lecture in Los Angeles, before she would let me go onto the stage, she evoked this being and let that being surround me.
The name of an album by Santana, do you remember, from the 70s?
I wasn't in the 70s. I was locked up in Montauk, so I really don't know very much about what the music was like. But I'd be glad to see that album cover.
There's a picture of the being.
What does it look like?
It looks like a winged lion, if I recall.
Is that right?
On the cover of the album.
Now that's pretty interesting. See, I learned something tonight. Now that's pretty interesting. And lion has always been a frequency which was important to me, which is why I have this and why I have this, the clinking jewelry, because that is a frequency that I connect with, and I even teach lion frequency to some of you. How many of you have I given lion frequency? Have any of you here? You, I've given, yeah. Not too many people, only those that I see associated with that. Well, anyone who can give me information on this, I would appreciate it. I don't know how far I can go as far as naming names, but I've had a lot of people helping me defend against this woman that I told you about. One of the people who is helping without naming names is a princess of, you think I can discuss that? Is the princess of the Montauk Indians. And she's been helping me with fighting against this evil person. She calls her an evil entity. She calls her from the depths of hell. Of course, she uses shamanic terms, and she uses procedures I don't necessarily agree with or understand, but yet she's helping me, and so I appreciate that help. Now, to finish this story, which is quite an intricate story, and I will use red because it's appropriate. When the reptilians attacked Lyrae, it destroyed that civilization. And in fact, I'll give you the float. I have a very complicated float chart here. I'll make it as easy as possible. The remnants of Lyrae spread out through the rest of the solar system, throughout the rest of the galaxy. They colonized such places as Tau Ceti, Procyon, Orion, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, Antares. Most of the known constellations and star systems in this galaxy were colonized by the Lyrians because their home area was destroyed. In this solar system, they colonized the planet Mars and another planet that no longer exists that was called Maldek. Maldek was a relatively large planet that existed between Mars and Jupiter. At that time, the Earth occupied the second orbit around the Sun, and it did not have an atmosphere like it has now. It was completely water-filled, both surface and atmosphere, not breathable. By the way, the Lyrians, when they became physical, had two forms. One was blonde hair, blue eyes, which was the standard form, and the other form was red hair and either blue or green eyes. Now, the red-haired person was considered very special and spiritual and also dangerous. They were extremely psychic and able to interact on many levels of communication and dimensionality. And they were very much used for priests and priestesses in Lyrian civilization. And in fact, they were used for breeding purposes because the genetics was so powerful. And in Montauk, most of the breeders were red-haired women with blue or green eyes. Now, the reptilians have a mindset that's very different than what humanity has. Reptilians believe that they are superior to all others. And as I mentioned at the bookstore last night, one of the reasons is they are androgynous. They have male and female in the same body. And since this is representative of what exists outside of physical reality, where there is no male or female gender, it's just energy, they consider themselves superior for bringing that type of information to physical reality. You'll also note, based on observing creatures on the earth right now, that reptilian forms do not evolve or adapt over eons or millions of years. They basically stay the same. And if there's a change, they just die out. Whereas mammalian forms need to adapt and evolve as there are changes occurring in their environment. So to the reptilian mind pattern, they're superior because they don't need to change or adapt. Therefore, they're completely perfect as they are. That's the mindset. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just the way they think. And so they go after the Aryan types, or the blonde hair, red hair, blue eyes, green eyes, because the genetics of those people are easily controlled. The mind control over that genetic is very, very easy as compared to other races. This is why, in history, those who saw globalization or control of this planet wanted to promote the Aryan race as the natural form, because those who did this were being controlled by the reptilians. And they found every reason they could think of to make other civilizations or races look inferior. They manufactured that. And so, those who existed on Mars and Maldek were the blonde-haired, blue-eyed type, with a few of the red-haired, green-eyed types in there as well. Reptilians love to use comets and asteroids. That's their mode of travel and attack. They sent an ice comet into the solar system to destroy the human colonists or the Lyrian refugees on Mars and Maldek. Now, at the time, if I may erase this, at the time, the setup of this solar system was very different. Well, I'll use this. I'll use this as the sun. And then the planet Mercury was where it always was. Then there was the Earth, which, as I said, was a water planet, totally. Then there was Mars, which had an Earth-like atmosphere and environment. Then there was, I'm not an artist, but there was Maldek. Then there was Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. The comet was sent on a collision course to Mars. This comet was really a ball of ice, but under mechanical direction. However, because it didn't calculate it properly, as it got closer to this area, the gravitational pull of Jupiter, Maldek, and Mars threw this ice comet off course, and it got too close to Maldek, causing that planet to explode, creating an asteroid belt that still now exists between Mars and Jupiter. Those from Maldek who were able to leave before it exploded went to Mars as refugees. As the ice comet then approached close to Mars, it pulled the atmosphere off of Mars as it passed, literally ripped by gravitational pull the atmosphere of Mars, leaving a very thin atmosphere that exists to this day. And only now are they beginning to tell you that Mars was once covered in oceans and had an atmosphere. They're telling you all of this now. Now, the refugees of Mars went underground in Mars. There's a vast underground in Mars. And that's where they went. As the planet continued closer towards the Earth, this comet, it went into a revolving spin with the Earth. they rotated around one another and the Earth flipped on its axis. The pull of the comet's gravitational field pulled the liquid atmosphere off of the Earth, and at the same time pulled the ice from the surface of the comet towards the Earth, kind of making a rotational spin. It ended up where most of the water covering of the Earth was polarized and frozen by the ice, creating the polar ice caps of Earth and causing landmass to rise above the surface. The comet then continued on and actually reversed places with the Earth, pushing the Earth out to the third orbit of the Sun, and the comet taking up the second orbit, and we now call that comet Venus. Venus was an ice comet. But because it is now so close to the Sun, the ice completely evaporated, creating a dense cloud cover around the planet that still exists. Now in 1982, I believe it was, a Soviet spacecraft penetrated the cloud layer of Venus and saw on the surface of Venus 7 domed areas lined up in a row. Just like that. Each several miles wide. Was photographed. It appeared on page 3 of most U.S. newspapers. Whole story about it. But at the very bottom, the last paragraph of the article, it said, NASA scientists believe that this is a natural formation. After they went through a whole page of saying how strange it was, and there were 7 domed objects, and they were lined up in a row, and what an anomaly this was, last paragraph was, scientists say it's a natural formation. Never heard a story again. I'm going to tell you, though, that these domes are biospheres for reptilian beings who live on the surface of Venus. Now, I want you to remember something that happened in the 1950s. I'm going to jump around in time. In the 1950s, there were these people who appeared on television and in the newspapers who claimed they were Venusians. Do you remember that? Those of you who are old enough, you don't have to say who you are. They claimed to be Venusians who came to Earth to uplift mankind. One of them actually wound up at the Pentagon. You remember his name? That's what he called himself, Val Thor. He claimed that he had a spaceship that landed in the Mojave Desert and that it was hidden and that he was a human type who had come from a civilization on Venus to help mankind, and that there were many like him on the planet. Now, just so that you know, the Illuminati like to present things as the opposite of what they are. What is Venus known as in mythology? Love. Okay? So if you're from Venus, what does that mean? You're full of love and peace, right? Okay? Now do the opposite of that. They're reptilian. Okay? They are incapable of the emotion of love because they don't have that within them. They're androgynous beings. And so, Val Thor actually was taken to the Pentagon and supposedly exists there to this very day. And there are photographs of him. If you have newspapers from the 50s and early 60s, occasionally there would be a picture of Val Thor at a public gathering of public figures, and there he was. And they listed him as Val Thor. And that was in the newspaper. So, now let's go back in time. Earth was now colonizable because it now had land mass and the water was ripped out of the atmosphere, leaving an oxygen-rich environment. The reptilians drove another object into the solar system to colonize the Earth. We now call that object the moon. The moon is the only known object in space that's supposed to be natural that doesn't spin. It faces in one direction all the time, like a ship in orbit, and that's exactly what it is. If you send a sonic resonance off of the moon, it pings like a glass, hollow glass. It's not solid. If it were solid, the sonic resonance would make a thump or a bang sound. It doesn't. And in fact, to this very day, if you have a telescope, especially on a full moon, and you train your telescope at any crater in the moon, you will see activity there. You will see lights moving, you'll see vehicles moving, you will see buildings. You can do this if you have a telescope, and it doesn't have to be an expensive telescope either. And they colonized a continent. And there were two main continents at the time. A continent that is known as, or was known as, Lemuria, or in some civilizations they called it Mu. These were reptilian beings. This continent extended over the Pacific Basin. The remnants of it now are Australia and New Zealand, the South Pacific Islands, the Philippines, Japan, and Hawaiian Islands, as well as the coast of California west of the San Andreas Fault Line. That was Lemuria. And one of the plant life that still exists on this planet from Lemuria are the redwood trees. That is what was covering Lemuria. Have any of you ever walked through the redwood forest? It's a very strange sensation, very heavy feeling, but there's kind of an ancientness to it. And it only exists in that one little area by the coastline. Now, they existed on this continent, this vast continent, for many thousands of years before the human refugees who were originally from Lemuria, from Lyra, and now were underground in Mars, and they needed a place to go. In addition, not only were the Martians, Mars refugees, in need of a place to go, but there was a group of Lyrian refugees who had colonized one of the planets in the Pleiadian system, who called themselves the Atlans. Now, the Atlans were not very well liked. They were troublemakers. They were renegades. They wanted to recreate the Lyrian civilization under their own terms. You can think of them very much like the neo-Nazis in this country who want to recreate a new Germany. Well, think of Lyra as the old Germany and these Atlans being the neo-Nazis. They were not nice people. And so it was decided that the refugees who were the Atlans and those who were on Mars would be allowed to also colonize the Earth, because quite frankly, the human refugees wanted to get rid of them. And they, what better place to send them but a place filled with reptiles? But it was colonizable. So can you guess where these refugees went? They went to a continent that came to be known as Atlantis, named after the Atlans. Most of the colonists were Atlans. There were very few from here. A lot of them stayed here because they wanted to see what would happen to the Atlans when they landed on a reptilian planet. And for a while, there really wasn't much going on between those two, because the full blast of the reptilian invasion force was not here. They simply wanted to get rid of the human colonists for a while. Understand that the reptilian mind, as far as the agenda of conquering, is insidious. They don't think like human beings, where human beings want to attack a country, they'll attack and take it over. Not the reptilians. They have eons of time because they don't change, they don't evolve, they're always the same. So they just slowly move where they have to go, like cancer, until they finally get the whole thing. That's what they're like. Now, as I told you about, those of you who attended the DNA class, mammalian life forms, or human life forms, mind pattern projects out animal and insect and plant life that is representative of the group mind pattern of the intelligent species. So a human form would project out mammalian life forms and associated plant life. What do you think an intelligent reptilian form would send out as animal-like creatures to occupy its world? Snakes, but in those days, dinosaurs. And there were many dinosaurs on the earth at that time. They were, for all intents and purposes, the domesticated animals of the reptilians. And that was a problem for the Atlanteans because these creatures were tremendously large. And they wouldn't keep their pets fenced up. Okay? So there was conflict between the two of them, and there were battles between the two of them. And the Martians, being so smart, waited for all of this because they were going to see what happened with the Atlanteans. Ultimately, Lemuria was attacked and sunk. The whole thing sank beneath the ocean, which we now know today as the Pacific Ocean. That left Atlantis as number one on the planet. And they started colonizing other areas as well. One of the places that they were looking to colonize was in what we now call Central Asia. But because they already had an entire continent to themselves, it was decided that the refugees from Maldek and Mars be allowed to colonize that area. And they colonized an area that we knew as Sumer, or the Sumerian civilization. It was colonized by the Martians. These were blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. If you put a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person in a deprivation tank where there is no external forces influencing the body, and all that's left is the natural biorhythm, the natural day for that person is 26 hours. That is the daytime length of the planet Mars. There's an exact match to blonde-haired, blue-eyed people biorhythm to the planet Mars. No other race has that category. Most other races on the Earth have a 24-hour biorhythm. Well, at the same time, there was trouble going on in Atlantis as well, because there was infighting among all of these people, and there was also the influx of another civilization from the star system called Sirius A, which I spoke to you about in the last time I did a seminar here. Now, what do you think happened to the remnants of the reptilians after Lemuria sank? Anybody? Many of them, if not all that were left, went underground. They went inside the earth. And I mentioned this in the lecture last night at the library, and I'll repeat it for you here. The earth is hollow. All planets that are formed the way the earth was formed are hollow. When you have a molten piece of material ejected from a star, as that molten piece spins in space and cools off, the material inside pushes to the side. And as it pushes to the side, the gases that are formed are pushed out of the poles of this now circular object, creating openings where the gas has now been ejected. And what is left is trapped between two platelets, the molten lava, which is between the outer crust and the inner crust, and then the hollow space. Now the pressure created by this molten lava that's now trapped between these two crusts is ejected specifically at the 19th parallel. That's where the Hawaiian volcanoes are. If you look along the 19th parallel, most of the volcanoes are along that area, or within a couple of 100 miles of it. If you look at other planets, all of them have volcanic activity at the 19th parallel. The largest volcano in this solar system is in Mars at the 19th parallel. The red spot at Jupiter, 19th parallel. Moons of Neptune and Jupiter and Saturn have craters and volcanic eruptions at the 19th parallel. This is a scientific fact. This information was embedded in the geometry of the pyramids and monuments on Mars. If you take the trigonometry of the Martian pyramids and the face on Mars, and you do the math, it tells the story of the 19th parallel. And where do you find that replicated on Earth? At the Giza Plateau. The face on Mars is equal or equivalent to the face on the Sphinx. And what body does the Sphinx have? A lion. There's that lion again. And so, I have another flowchart to give you, which will show you what the reptilians did, because they don't give up, ever. They are insidious in what they do. They decided, now that they were inside the Earth, they were not on the moon anymore, they were cut off basically from the Draco star system. What are they going to do? They wanted to recapture the Earth in the best way possible, and the best way would be by genetic breeding, hybridization with the human beings on the planet. And here I need to give you another story. Those of you who are familiar with the Bible story of how creatures or Adam was created, the story of Adam. All of the Bible is symbolic. It is an allegory, not to be taken literally. And when there was a peace treaty at one point between the humans and the reptilians, the peace treaty was that they would try to create a new being which had the semblance or the mixture of all the genetics, not only of the reptilians and the Atlans, but of all the other civilizations in the galaxy that had an interest in the Earth. And this prototype was going to be called Adam, which in ancient Hebrew language means from the earth. And that's why in the Bible it says, let us make man in our image. God didn't say, I will make man in my image. Let us make man in our image, plural. And the story of the removal of the rib from Adam to create Eve, to create a female, is an allegorical story of using the foundational reptilian androgynous body and separating it into a male and female figure. That's an allegorical story of the separation into the sexes from a reptilian body. And so I'm going to give you a flow chart, and it might look a little bit messy, but it's the best I can do given the circumstances, of how the flow of civilization and reptilian DNA got into all of you. Because every single person on this planet, whether they're human or not, has reptilian DNA. And that's a unique situation in the galaxy. That's why there's such an interest in this planet from elsewhere, because nowhere else is there such a genetic mixture. And so, if we start out, and I'll try to make this as neat as possible, but I have to write small. If we start out with the Draco and the Lyrian civilizations, we find that there was a split here to Maldek and Mars on this side, and here was the Pleiades, or the Atlans, and this then went to Sumer, and this then went to Atlantis. And I'll do some work here so it won't be too confusing first. Here we have Venus and the Moon, and then here we have Lemuria. So we're all on the same page with this so far. This is reptilian form, this is human form. Pure human form, which nobody on this planet is a pure human form. Now, from Atlantis, or from Mars, we have Sumer, and then Sumer led into Babylon. Now this is very important. Babylon is very important in the reptilian ritual and ceremony. The Babylonians spread out to become the Khazars in the Caucasus mountain, and they in turn colonized Europe and the Middle East. Who then in turn colonized the Americas. Sumerian civilization actually led into the Phoenicians. They were the forerunners of the Egyptians, who, by the way, now this is where it gets complicated, the refugees from Atlantis also colonized Egypt. Okay, this is going to get a little messy now. I have an idea. I want to do the reptilians in red. Oh, let me finish this part. Then the Egyptians actually had an influence in Greece, and Greece actually became part of Rome and Spain, which led to the colonization of the Americas as well. Now, as far as the reptilians are concerned, once the Lemuria sank, they went underground, and I told you about the hybridization program. That began in Sumer. That was one of the first places that the human-reptilian DNA mix for the shape-shifting reptilians began. And they also colonized India, China, and Japan. Now, in Sumer and Babylon, this is where the hybridization of the reptilians and the humans went into full force. It was here that they created a unique hybridization blend of 50% genetics reptilian, 50% genetics human. These then became what was known as the blue bloods. Who became the royalty of the earth. They call them blue bloods because their bloodstreams have a high copper content. When copper oxidizes, it turns blue or green color. When iron blood oxidizes, it turns red or brown. The Indian caste system is a direct replica of the Draconian or Lemurian hierarchy. They had different levels or species that would perform different tasks. They had a warrior caste, a spiritual caste, a worker caste, scientist caste. All of these levels were within the reptilian hierarchy and was recreated especially in India in the Hindu religion or the Indian civilization. And there are documents over 50,000 years old in India that talk about this exact event. And they also talk, and these are called the Vedas. And in fact, they also talk about a vehicle called a Vimana, which is a craft that can fly into the atmosphere or beyond the atmosphere and shoot lances that can disrupt the ground and create mushroom clouds, nuclear devices. This was written 50,000 years ago. And those were written from something else. They were copied from something else. But the newest ones are 50,000 years old. This area of the world right now is very, very important, because the royalty of the earth call themselves the Illuminati. In Latin, it means the enlightened ones, or the illuminated ones. Officially, this group began in 1776, created in Bavaria by a man by the name of Adam Weishaupt. That's the official creation of the Illuminati. He put together this organization in Bavaria to pull together wealthy nobility and royalty to create a better world for the earth. Now that is an interesting date, 1776, because what else happened that year? Declaration of Independence and the creation of the United States of America, which, by the way, which I'll explain to you in a moment, is not even a country. And so, the Illuminati finally in 1776 decided to come out of the woodwork to make themselves known publicly, when in fact they existed from day zero. Really, they existed in their present form from the days of Sumer and Babylon. And they worshipped a pair of deities, a male and female. Male was called Nimrod, and the female was called Semiramis. In Egypt, these were changed to Osiris and Isis, but they were the same deity. Their symbol, I'm not the greatest artist, was the fleur-de-lis. Or the lily, symbolized by the lily flower, the three-pronged flower. And Nimrod, as the god in Sumer, was depicted with three horns. There are also sexual connotations to this because it's a very sexual religion. And he required blood sacrifice. Now, the disturbing thing is that in modern times, the same scenario was created in religion in the Middle East, only the same figure they used as Jesus and Mary. There's always male, female, male, female, male, female, one creating the other. There are statues in Sumer showing Semiramis with a human form, a reptilian face, reptilian claws and feet, holding a hybrid baby. That's what they worshipped in Sumer. You can see the picture in any magazine or book related to Sumerian civilization. But all religion from that point onward was based on this type of scenario. Can I erase this? Yes?
Yes.
I have a lot of information. I'm going to try to get through as much of it as I possibly can. I've only gone through this very first part of 3 pages that I needed to tell you about. Bless you, whoever it is. Now, I will tell you that the number 13 is very significant to the Illuminati, because in the last 500 years or so, also even last 1,000 years, there are 13 families that control this planet. 13 was also the number of colonies of the United States originally. 13 is also the age when the ancient Hebrews said that children become adults, what they call a bar mitzvah. And 13 is actually the true number of zodiac signs. One sign has been deleted for the past 1,000 years or more. And that sign was located between Scorpio and Sagittarius. And can you imagine what the symbol of that zodiac sign was? It was a dragon, a reptile. That's the 13th zodiac sign. 13 is significant. Do you want to know the names of these 13 families? Okay, I'm going to give it to you. But I need to tell you something else. 13 is at the top of the pyramid of families. Beneath them is called the Committee of 300. Those are 300 families who are descended from those original 13 who form the next level of their control pyramid. But the 13 are as follows. These are the families. Some of the names you will recognize, some you will not.
Is there significance to the order of the names?
No. These are the 13 families. These families control every minute detail of your life. Can you see it? Can you see that? Some of them you can remember or recognize, some you may not be so familiar with. Where I had flashes, the Sinclairs are also spelled St. Clair. The Rothschilds were originally known as the Bowers. The Warburgs were originally known as Del Banco, hence the name bank or banking. The Windsors, the proper British family, actually are German and changed their name in World War I so that people wouldn't think that they were German. but their real name is Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And same thing with Cavendish, whose sublevels are called the Kennedys. Some of these people are in public power right now, and some are not. The Plantagenet family has its center in France, but also sent emissaries or colonies to Scotland and Ireland. Hanover, of course, is a big German city with that name. Everyone knows about the Rothschilds, which is a German derivation of Rothschild, which means the red shield, hence the Red Cross, which you see almost every day, which is also on the flag of Switzerland, which is also not a real country. The Krupps, oh yes, the Krupps, claim to fame, they built the ovens in the concentration camp, and all of the machinations for the Nazi Empire. The de Medicis, you know, Italian family, very well known in banking. Romanovs, Russian royalty. My great uncle had the great distinction of having them assassinated in 1917. The Rockefellers, you know, were actually German. Kennedys, of course, you know, Cavendish, same thing. And the Habsburgs, who are the royalty of Austria. These families control everything in your life. Every single thing in your life.
You didn't make a comment about the Bruce.
Oh yes, the Bruce, one of the strongest families in Scotland. What movie was made about them? Braveheart. I happen to know one of their descendants who interviewed me for a book she's writing. Oh, and by the way, all of these are shape-shifting reptilians. Every single one of them. And do you remember a couple of years ago a claymation, no, it wasn't claymation, it was actually human beings dressed in puppets that did a show about being dinosaurs in the old times? Do you remember that show? And what was the name of that dinosaur family? The Sinclairs. Remember that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sinclair Oil.
Sinclair Oil. The gas station. What's on their gas station? A dinosaur. It's in front of your nose if you look at it.
So is that actually how you know?
They can shapeshift into reptilian form. They have a 50-50 split of human reptilian DNA. Most of you have more of a 90-10 split. You all have reptilian DNA. But once you approach this, you are a blue blood. You are royalty, the global elite, the rulers of the New World Order. And you shapeshift. And you need to do ceremony, including blood ritual and hormone intake of human beings in order to maintain a human form. Beneath this group, this 13 families, is the Committee of 300. The Committee of 300 is the next layer in this pyramid of control. And guess where you all are? At the bottom layer. And isn't it interesting that on the US dollar is a pyramid with an eye watching everything that's underneath the pyramid? Now how do they explain that Egyptian Sumerian symbol on a US dollar? Do they explain it when you're in school? No. Do they say why there is an eye watching everything? No. What does the eye represent? The eye represents, if you remember, Osiris, the all-seeing eye, which goes back to the reptilian sun god of Nimrod. And it is a sun god because reptilians worship sun, And one of their symbols is a blazing sun. And you've seen them all over the place. Okay, sometimes they look like flames coming out of the sun, but in fact, it's in the center of the Argentinian flag, which where the winged reptilians are. They're all over the place if you keep your eyes open. Now, in addition to this symbol being on the U.S. dollar, those of you who have a dollar left in your wallet, if you look underneath, where it used to say e pluribus unum, it now says Novus Ordem Seclorum, which means New World Order. That's on your money. Okay, so it's already part of your money. And in addition, there's a globalization or unification of all the currencies of the earth, especially in Europe, where they use now the euro dollar, which the Europeans didn't like the word dollar in their currency, so now they just call it the euro. And if you look at the exchange rate, it's basically 1 for 1. US dollar will get you a euro. In South America, Ecuador has adopted the US dollar as its national currency. So has Costa Rica. Most of those people never saw a dollar in their life, but it's their national currency. And if you go to Argentina, the peso is 1-to-1 with the dollar. So Ronald Reagan and George Bush got their wish when they said that they wanted from Alaska to Argentina one economic unit. It exists right now. Europe, same thing. There is a United States of Europe. You can drive across any border without the use of a passport or even stopping. They'll stop you if they want to, but you don't have to stop. You don't need a passport. When you land at an airport in Europe, there is 2 lines, one for European market members and everybody else. And in Switzerland, there's even a line if you have a US or Canadian passport, there's a separate line for you. So there's all of this going on all over the earth, and if you travel a lot, you get to see all of this. Now, may I erase this part also? By the way, if you're interested in some of the names of this Committee of 300, I'll just give you a sample. One of the names, which you may not recognize, is called Agnelli. Agnelli, and they own the Fiat Corporation. And they tell the Italian government what to do. There is also the Spencers, Carringtons, Norman, Ford, Tafts, Roosevelt, Russell, Stewart spelled both ways with a U and an EW, Seaton, Hamilton, Campbell, Bush, Douglas, Montgomery, Balliol, Graham, Lindsay, Cameron, Wilson, Morgan, Harriman, Carnegie, Mellon, Oppenheimer, Rhodes, Hines, Savoy, Schiff, Kuhn, Loeb, Coolidge, and Delano. These are just samples of the Committee of 300 surnames that are being used. And I'll erase this now so I can give you some more information. Now, as I mentioned before the break, when these shape-shifting people do their ceremony, it always involves the use of human blood and hormones, because when you are trying to maintain a particular form, you need to intake the genetics of that form to maintain the integrity of it. Otherwise, you regress to your original form, which in their case would be reptilian. And you've heard the old stories, and there's even been movies and comedy made out of it, where there are these wealthy families in Europe, or even royalty, who have this family member that's locked away in a dungeon or in a tower because he's very strange. And whenever the people who are guests in the castle or the building go to look, they find this gigantic reptilian-like creature living locked away. It's because he reverted back to the original form and did not shapeshift any longer. He got stuck in the reptilian form. And as it's turning out, as the centuries are going by and the interbreeding and the intermarriage continues, they're finding it more and more difficult to maintain a human form. And so they're doing more and more ceremony on what is called the morphogenetic grid. And I know many of you have heard of this before. The Earth is very much like a body. Just like you have a chakra system and you have the meridians that come out of the chakra system, the Earth has energy centers and ley lines that come out of the energy centers and crisscross like a grid or a matrix. And on certain places where they intersect, there is a powerful energy vortex created. And that grid or that matrix of energy around the Earth is called the morphogenetic grid. And the reason the word genetic is in it is because it resonates to the occupants of the planet, so that there's a connection between the energy of the Earth and the energy of the humans or creatures that live on it, creating an interlocking unit called morphogenetic grid. If you're a chiropractor or an acupuncturist or acupressure, and you press a certain point of the body, you are actually affecting other parts of the body that are connected to that pressure point. Same on the Earth. If you perform a ceremony or create an energy pressure point at a specific part of the Earth's morphogenetic grid, you will then affect all the other parts of the Earth that you want to connect with. They perform their ritual and ceremony on such locations. For example, the pyramids of Egypt are located on a very big center point on the morphogenetic grid. Montauk is located at the edge of a morphogenetic grid. This point here in Montauk, Long Island, connects to Land's End in England. There's a direct connection. And when Aleister Crowley did his sexual magical rituals in Land's End, it connected directly to Montauk Point. Montauk Point is also part of the old Atlantean civilization. And it is, in fact, the top of a mountain chain that connects all the way down to the Caribbean Ocean. And the Montauk Indians' leader, they called a pharaoh. In fact, the name of the Montauk princess, her last name is Pharaoh. And, of course, that is related to the kings in Egypt, which then fall back to their common ancestor in the Atlantean time period. And, in fact, up until the early part of this century, you could see the tops of pyramids along the beaches in Montauk Point, which have subsequently been covered up. In fact, the town of Montauk is located directly over a gigantic underground pyramid, which the government was very interested in accessing because of the technology that is inside of it. Basically, the control group, the Illuminati, is interested in mind controlling the entire population. Because let's face it, there's only a few thousand of them, and there's 6 billion of all of you. There's just not enough armies in the world that can control that size of a population. So the best way to do it is through mind control, and that's where the Montauk Project came into being, because it enabled them to test and develop specific mind control devices and techniques that were able to be put out into the public. And that's one of the things I was involved in at the time. When they do their rituals, it's on specific dates that mean something to them. Generally, it coincides with the full moon. One of their greatest holidays occurs on what you would call Halloween. That is a very important date for the reptilians. And that's where Halloween got the reputation of having ghosts and goblins and weird things happening, because that was a ceremony that they performed every October 31st. And recently, if you can recall, what incident occurred on Halloween that involved the deaths of a couple of hundred people in an instant? Egypt Air 990. Okay. That was part of a ritual ceremony slaughter. And where did it happen? Not far from Montauk Point. Okay, on this line. What else happened along that line that continues out like this? Well, let's map it. Here we had Egypt there, 990. Here we had, this is Long Island. Here we had TWA 800. Here we had Swissair 101. Gee, that looks kind of suspicious to me. Oh wait, there's something else. Right over here. Someone just said it. Why him? Well, let's look at one of the Illuminati members who's trying to work her way up the ladder, who's very high up the ladder, and you know her as Hillary Clinton. Okay? Now, Hillary Clinton never lived in New York State a day of her life, but she decided that it was in her best interest to become a state senator, so she moved to Westchester, New York, and the next day started to run for senator. But she had some competition. She had JFK Jr., who, if he ran for God, people would vote for him in New York. She also had Mayor Giuliani, who, by the way, the local people lovingly referred to as Giulianazzi, because he's very strict and tough with a lot of things. Now, what is she going to do? Okay, people love Junior, and Giuliani's really tough, and New York is now, you know, crime-free practically and cleaned up. What's she going to do? She just got there. So what you do what any self-respecting Illuminati person would do is then to kill your opponents. Okay? So she had JFK plane rigged with a bomb, and that worked very well. He took off from an airport here in central New Jersey. His flight plan, here's Martha's Vineyard, here's Connecticut, Rhode Island, there's New York City. This is there's water over here, here's Connecticut. His flight plan took him right across the coast, right here, and then he was going to go right across here to Martha's Vineyard. That's the standard flight plan from where he was. But something happened over here, just around the part where TWA crashed. It spooked him, and he cut across the island and then went east and went down over there. He was only 10 miles from the airport. Okay? Now, it took them, this is JFK, LaGuardia, Newark, Islip, Boston. This whole area is like radar central for the Earth. Okay? It took them 8 days to find a plane that was constantly monitored by radar. It took them 8 days to find a plane that was in this little area of the ocean, surrounded by islands and land that was not very deep water at all. The Kennedys never said a word about it. In fact, Caroline Kennedy, who lives on Long Island, didn't even go up there. She's the last one left. I would advise her not to leave her home. Okay? And so what happened was they finally found wreckage, okay? And then they brought the bodies up, autopsied them, burned them, and then put them back where they found them within 24 hours. Okay? Kennedy's never said anything. You would think they would have a funeral, even if it was closed casket, right? Nothing. Burn them, put them back down. And then the coroner, who autopsied 3 bodies in a matter of hours, and came up with the idea that they died from impact trauma. Well, if they died from impact trauma, how come there was no debris? If the plane hit the water and then sank, why did only the inside of the plane show up and nothing from the outside of the plane? Okay, why were there suitcases that were inside the plane washing ashore when all the outside of the plane never appeared anywhere? And that's because the plane blew up in midair. And they knew where it was all along. So they got rid of him. So now she only had to worry about Giuliani. So lo and behold, he suddenly develops prostate cancer. And he can't run. Okay? So they got rid of Giuliani, they got rid of JFK Jr., and they have this guy that no one ever heard of before, replacing Giuliani, running against her, who's obviously going to lose. In fact, he's so inept that while he walked in the streets doing his campaigning, he literally fell on his face on camera, and they had to pick him up. That he can't even walk straight. No, he just can't walk. So that's who they have running against Hillary Clinton. Okay, she's not worried in the least bit. Okay, and the same thing with the presidential campaign. They have Al Gore, who can't even hold his reptilian form anymore. I mean, he just looks like a reptile even when he's human, right? And he has the personality of a lizard as well. And then you have Bush, whose father was the first inner circle person from behind the scenes to get into public office, whose grandfather, Prescott Bush, financed the Nazis in the 1930s and developed the Nazi empire. Prescott Bush's friends, Helen and George Barton, and their friend Hector Echeverria, in 1933 created the Internal Revenue Service out of New York City. And first they went to Delaware and incorporated it, and it is a privately held corporation by those three people and their descendants, which is, by the way, best friends with President. Yes?
Do you have the list of who the owners of the Federal Reserve are?
I have them, but not with me, because it's a very long list, and they're individually owned in various parts of the country. Okay? Now, here's another thing. The post office is owned by the Bank of England, which in turn is owned by the Windsor family. Now, in the year 1213, the British royal family signed a mandate saying that anything from that point onward ever owned by the royal family of Britain or England is to be transferred to the Vatican. The Vatican will be the name on record as being the owner, but the royal family will be the executor of the assets. And it gets better, because this country, back in the 1600s, was called the Virginia Tobacco Company, owned by the British royal family, which then transferred ownership to the Vatican. So you don't live in a country, you are employees of a corporation. And that is why, if you are subject to the board of directors, and if one of those board of directors owns another corporation and asks you to pay money to that corporation and you sign a contract doing that, then you're indebted to that corporation. And that's what the IRS is. So as soon as you send in a tax return and you sign it, there is a statement there that says you now owe it from that point onward. You've just written a contract and signed it. Okay? You are not citizens of any country. You are citizens or employees of a corporation, which to this day is in existence. That's why the board of directors believes they can do whatever they want to you, because they own you. And unbeknownst to you in the 60s and 70s, actually from President Carter onward, executive orders have been signed stating that the Constitution and all the rights of all U.S. citizens are to be abolished upon executive order. As soon as they put that in effect, you no longer have any rights. And they signed it over to the United Nations. You can look at the documents. They're on file on the internet. Not even keeping it a secret from you. All they have to do is declare a national emergency. But hold on a second. They did that in World War II to collect taxes for the war effort. That was never rescinded. So theoretically, this country is still under a state of national emergency, and they can do whatever they want. If they come to your house and say, Janet, there's a state of emergency, we're taking your house, nothing you can do about it. You have no rights. None. And so then if you have the bright idea of, let's defend ourselves, we have the right to bear arms, well, that's an easy problem to solve, because all you have to do then is create a situation where children are getting killed in schools, and then everyone wants you to take your arms away, the weapons. And New York City and Los Angeles are paying $50 for every weapon turned in, no questions asked. License or unlicensed. Go take it. $50. Okay? Unarm the nation. Can't defend yourself. And it gets even better than that. Remember I told you that the reptilians, the original ones, went underground. Those original ones in the true 100% form are still there. But now they're coming to the surface. If you remember, back a couple of years ago, I think it was 96, the Hale-Bopp comet, and there was a big rumor that said there was actually some big, large object trailing behind it. And at the same time, they came up with this cult figure in San Diego who killed themselves and all the members so that they can fly away to this object behind Hale-Bopp and live an extraordinary life, making anyone who believes in that object look foolish. That cult in San Diego was set up years and years ago. There's actually a movie made about it called He and She. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie. You can go and look it up in the video store. And it's a story about this man who killed himself, Appleby, and his wife who passed on since then, who went around the country claiming to be extraterrestrials, having people give them all of their assets and follow them to West Virginia, where a UFO was going to come and take them off the planet. Of course, somewhere along the line, people lost track of them, and they just vanished into thin air until they reappeared in San Diego. Now, this guy was a CIA operative, and they knew all along what they were planning to do. And most likely, he didn't kill himself, but he was killed. And then probably all the others were killed as well. Now, isn't it strange that in San Diego County, the coroner from Los Angeles had to go and take the bodies from 90 miles away? Why? Oh, he happens to be the same coroner who took Marilyn Monroe's body out of her house a couple years ago when she was murdered also, because she was having an affair, as you know, with both Kennedy brothers. And the night before her death, she got on the phone, and this is on a tape recording. She said, I'm going to blow all of this sky high. I'm going on a news program tomorrow, and I'm going to tell them all what you've done. She had his notebook. And in the notebook was information about the reptilians and what they really were. And she was going to go on a news broadcast and tell them all what happened. And so, in the middle of the night, an ambulance came to her house, drugged her, took her for a drive, brought her body back, and put it in the bedroom for the maid to find. This was witnessed by a neighbor. She was murdered. Now, here's the interesting juxtaposition of all of this. What song was written about her? Okay, Elton John wrote that. What did he use that song for later on? Another murder. Okay, only she was murdered at a place called, in French, the Bridge of the Soul, Pont de l'Alma, which in ancient times was a sacrificial location to the goddess Diana. Is that a coincidence? Why was she killed? First of all, she was chosen from birth to be a sacrificial queen. In the lines of Semiramis, she was the symbolic Semiramis for the reptilian religion. Her only purpose in life was to create an heir for the throne, because she had more human genetics that could be blended then with the reptilian genetics of the Windsor family to get a 50-50 split, because their ratio was deteriorating. She, before she married Prince Charles, was taken to a ceremony where she witnessed them shape-shifting. And when she came back to her apartment, she was throwing up from being sick of seeing the sights of them actually slaughtering babies and drinking their blood. These people actually have women kept in cages. Just sole purpose in life is to give birth and have the baby sacrificed. To reptilians, babies are a delicacy. They have the strongest genetics and the strongest hormones. And especially small children who are brought to the point of severe fear and are murdered at that point, that is the highest energetic output that they can possibly capture. And that's what they do. And drink the blood. This is part of their ceremony. This is the sacrifice. Now, Diana was pregnant, and they used the fetus in a ceremony after they killed her. The car she was riding in was not her regular car. It was a car that had been rebuilt and sent from Germany to get her in Paris. The driver was not drunk. If any of you had seen the video taken at the hotel before they left, did he look drunk to you? If he was anywhere near drunk as they claimed him to be, he'd be falling on his face. Do you think she would have gotten in a car with a driver who was that drunk? No. And why did it take over 2 hours for them to bring her body from the accident scene to a hospital that was only 20 minutes away? Why? What were they doing to her body? And why then is she enshrined in a tomb on an island on her ancestral land? I'm going to tell you why. Because the New World Order has in its plans to create a new global religion. And that global religion will have Diana as an icon. And in the next 6 to 12 months, you will see people claiming to see her vision appear to them, talking about the New World Global Order to come. And this is part of a project that the Illuminati have along with the New World Order. Bless you again, whoever that is. It's called the Blue Beam Project. Blue Beam Project is designed to holographically project the image of religious figures to various parts of the world, like they're doing in Medjugorje, like they did in Fatima. That's for the secrets they're not releasing, but the Vatican has stored up. Okay. And it's in operation right now. They've been testing it. For example, on a window of a bank in Tampa, Florida, after a rainstorm, the face of Jesus appeared. And every morning to this very day, groups of people come and pray at a bank window. Now, what statement is that making? Okay? And so, someone mentioned or asked me before about the Shroud of Turin. I'm going to talk about the Shroud of Turin also. Whether you realize it or not, cloning has been around for quite a number of years. In fact, the Germans, in this century, perfected it in 1927 and have been manufacturing little Aryan soldiers since that time. The United States perfected it at MIT in 1967 when they manufactured the first cloned human being. Only in the last few years have they let you know that cloning is successful by showing you sheep and a dog and this animal and that animal. Because if you'll accept that, now in the newspaper they're talking about cloning babies. And then they're starting to talk about removing birth defects and genetic anomalies. So does that mean in the future, if you have a family history of a certain type of birth defect or anomaly, are you not allowed to have children? Will they regulate who has children and not, like they do in China? That's happening right now. And so the Blue Beam Project has as its final coup a cloned Jesus, taken from the blood samples from the Shroud of Turin, which is not a fake or a hoax, but a real object. Now, for years it was on display in Turin. And then scientists came in and they carbon dated it and they said, no, it's a fake from the Middle Ages. Now, as far as I know, no one in the Middle Ages was able to create a negative image, like a photographic negative image, as far as I know. And so people started not going to the Shroud of Turin. until someone came up with the idea of, hey, wait a minute, they couldn't have done that in the Middle Ages. Let's look at that again. Well, suddenly there's a fire in the church, and the church burns to the ground, and the shroud disappears, and nobody knows where it is. Until about 4 months ago, when Israeli scientists said, we have a piece of the shroud, and we tested it, and we found pollen that could have only come from the Middle East 2,000 years ago. So it's not a fake. That's Israeli scientists who have no interest, supposedly, in Christianity. And so now they have proof, genetically, that this is a 2,000-year-old item from the Middle East with blood samples on it. I'm going to tell you that years ago in Montauk, when I was working at Montauk, we already knew that they had cloned a body from the blood samples on the Shroud of Turin, and that this cloned body will be presented as a new Jesus coming as the second coming. And what will people say? The year 2001, 2002, prove he's Jesus. Let's take a DNA sample. Isn't that the buzz thing now? But everything's a DNA sample. So when they take his DNA sample, it will match with Shroud of Turin. It's him. Only this one will be a programmed clone that will say that the New World Order is his new holy empire. He will be the new Nimrod, who will be Semiramis. Diana. That's the New World Order religion for the future that you will all be forced to believe in. In addition, there are 5 concentration camps built now in the U.S. and Canada, each one able to hold 5 million people. There are also 270,000 railroad cars being built in Oregon to hold dissidents and carry them to these concentration camps. Each car able to hold 40 dissidents chained to the wall. The government, U.S. Accounting Office, also requisitioned last year 200 million body bags. I don't know what for, do you? Yeah, but it's a pretty odd number to ask for. That's 2/3 the population of the United States. In addition, they have plans to invade this country. That's what some of the fires are about in the West. The reptilians are coming to the surface, the original ones, because the object behind Hale-Bopp is behind the dark side of the moon, and it is causing weather anomalies on the Earth and gravitational pull. That's why the volcanoes are going off. That's why there's earthquakes occurring in the Pacific Rim and elsewhere. And that's why many physicians who I work with are reporting to me that many women are having 2 menstrual cycles per month. This is becoming more and more common. And you're going to see that happening as this object gets closer and closer and closer. It is filled with pure 100% reptilians from the Draconis star system who are planning their invasion. And this is scaring the hybrids left behind on the Earth who did not accomplish what they were supposed to accomplish hundreds of thousands of years ago. And now mommy and daddy are back, and they're not happy with the way the children left their home. So they're very scared. And so now there is, in effect, a plan by pro-human groups to eliminate the genetics of the reptilians as they come to the surface. And they're doing this with the contrails. They're spraying a mixture, which Doc was kind enough to give me a map of where they're concentrating the spraying. The dark spots are where the sprays are concentrated, designed to lock up reptilian DNA and activate human DNA. Those out there who have a high percentage of reptilian DNA will get sick and die, and they are getting sick and dying. And those with human DNA may get sick, but will develop an immunity, hopefully, and survive. Now, up until last year, this was only being sprayed in English-speaking countries. Only last year did I find out that Germany has now been added. So even the pro-human groups are racist. Don't think for 1 second that if the pro-human groups win, that things will be wonderful. It will just be a different tyrant. Instead of being a reptilian, it will be a human tyrant. But the agenda is the same.
So who's behind this, right?
This is behind pro-human factors within the New World Order. I'll pass this around. Give it. It belongs to Doc, though. So give that back to him. Sorry?
The pro-human is the new world
No.
order?
Pro-human is reptilian, the hybrids. But amongst that pyramid of control are human groups that under their control. And there are human factors or breakaway units that seek to eliminate the purebred reptilians as they come to the surface. The purebred reptilians and whoever would support them. Yes?
It's interesting that this has come up because I was just commenting to myself, this is, I think, maybe the beginning of the week. I haven't seen any contrails around here for about a month. And before, they were just almost every day.
Mm-hmm.
They're often
Are they?
Yeah, I haven't noticed any of that.
Now listen to what will happen. The reptilians are coming through openings in the cave system throughout the world. Most of the national cave systems are being closed down for various reasons. Last Thanksgiving when I was in the Ozarks in Missouri, and I went to see one of their big caves, one of the largest in the country, it was closed due to electrical systems. As far as I know, there are no electrical systems in these caves. But it was the reason they used that it was closed down. Is to prevent people from seeing what's coming up. And all of the fires that are happening in the western United States are covering up openings, especially in Montana and Idaho and those areas, and New Mexico, where the reptilians are coming to the surface and they want to keep people away. That's one of the reasons they raise the gas prices so high, so people won't travel so much and they'll be off the road. But it gets better than that, because they will plan for civil disruptions across the United States after they crash the stock market. They will have people going berserk, rioting, looting, chaos. They will tell you that the civil defenses, military, cannot handle the situation because it's too widespread. And so the President of the United States, who at that time will be George Bush, will ask the UN to bring their troops into the United States and patrol the streets and give back civil order. You already have a foreign troop occupying this country now. They've already brought in Canadian troops into the northwestern United States. I will also tell you that in southeastern Canada, they have German troops and German Air Force planes on the ground waiting for their orders. I personally know people in Canada who have now been assigned to the Air Force bases in northern Ontario and Quebec with German forces. In the Pacific Northwest and in Alaska, they have stationed now Chinese and Russian troops and the Air Force. When the civil disobedience becomes out of hand, these forces will invade the United States. It will happen very soon. When they finally occupy the country, which, by the way, they will declare a national emergency officially, and you will have no rights. They will declare that the United States is too large of an area to be controlled from a central location, and so they will defer to the United Nations, who will break the United States into two halves along the Mississippi River. Atlanta will become the capital of the Eastern District, and Denver will become the capital of the Western District. That is why Atlanta and Denver have identical, gigantic airports, and that is why Atlanta and Denver have replicated all governmental agencies from Washington, which have now relocated to both of those cities. Have any of you been to the Denver airport, the new Denver airport? At baggage claim 17, you will see a gigantic mural of a black woman, a Hispanic woman, Jewish woman, an Oriental woman, and an Indian woman lying in coffin holding dead babies.
Oh, no.
Oh yes, I have pictures of it. You can go see it yourself. And standing above them, with a torch and a sword, is a little blonde Aryan boy. And on the floor of the Denver airport, embedded in the tiles as you get off, are little reptiles all over the floor. And in the stained glass windows are swastikas and the fleur-de-lis. So it's in front of your face, right in front of you. Don't even believe what I'm telling you. Go look for yourself.
In the structure itself?
Yeah.
With the
Yep.
hidden...
And I have the photographs, which I left at home, but I have them. And outside the airport, on a big plaque, it says, dedicated to the people of Denver by the New World Airport Organization. And underneath Denver Airport, and some subterranean cavern that they built, contractors built something with enough concrete to build a 6-lane highway between Denver and Chicago. That's how much is built underneath the airport, which, by the way, has been built an hour away from Denver. And when you drive into the airport, there are cameras that monitor your license plate no matter where you're from. And when you leave, they monitor again. So whoever goes in, they know who comes out. And if there's anything blocking your license plate, they will stop you and make you clear it off so they can monitor it.
What's the underground thing?
The underground is a gigantic holding pen with entrances and subterranean caverns that crisscross North America. And it's built directly over what the government refers to as a reptilian nest. These are nests where there are large pockets of reptilian cultures living there. One of the largest areas extends from Monmouth area of California around Mount Shasta, all the way down to the Mojave, 29 Palms area, and then east to Arizona and what is commonly known as Area 51 in Nevada. That is one of the largest underground reptilian areas. So everyone's pretty quiet.
Yeah.
But like I said, you're going to see, and you're seeing it now in the news, and from now on, all of these things happening. And how do you want proof that George Bush is going to win the election? All you have to do is look at who Al Gore picked for a running mate. Nobody's going to vote for him. Nobody. At least not in the Midwest or the South or the Northwest. He guaranteed his loss, but that's what they were supposed to do. But even if you did go and vote, if everybody in the country secretly joined forces and voted for him, he'd still lose because it's all electronic voting and it means nothing. You might as well press the lever on your toilet bowl to vote because it probably would have more value than going to an election booth. Yes, you have a question.
No, I have heard that voting machines, are set up and you vote for a full day's letter. You get your vote.
Well, it's whoever they want to win. Months or weeks, years before any election, they know who's going to win. It's already rigged. Yes.
And the other thing I heard is the time span for this to come about before the United Nations people be
Yeah, there definitely will be before 2003. And the way it looks now, I heard some information that said the stock market crash may be before the end of the summer, or any time between there and spring, but maybe before the end of the summer. And then you'll start to see the civil disturbances begin, which isn't that far away. Okay. But certainly, this country, as you know it, will no longer exist. But what you should also know is that it never really existed in the first place. It was never a country. It was a corporation. And just like Switzerland, it was never a country. Switzerland is a Vatican-created artificial device for financial holdings. That's why they have no army. That's why they're the only ones allowed to defend the Vatican. Oh, yes, you asked me yesterday at the library, at the bookstore. Yugoslavia and the breakup of that country, which, by the way, Yugoslavia is an artificially created country. There was no such thing as Yugoslavia before World War I. Okay? It was a punishment of Serbia for killing Emperor Franz Josef of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And as you know, that area of Serbia, Croatia, Macedonia, all those little tiny countries were the only place in Europe that had Muslim population, other than the main part of Turkey. But as far as the main part of Europe, there was all Christian except for that little part of Yugoslavia. That is unacceptable to the Illuminati. Their goal is to eliminate Muslim fundamentalists from the face of the earth. And that's what they're in the process of doing right now. That's why the so-called peace talks failed between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which, by the way, Israel is also an artificially created country, okay? Which, if you know the true history of Judaism and the Hebrew people, they were a conglomeration of tribes from the Middle Eastern areas that had no genetic unification at all. And that the original religion was the result of the Hittite people and other groups who did sacrificial ritual slayings that are even mentioned in the Bible. The mere fact that God called upon Abraham to kill his own son, that's a ritualistic slaying. And he was going to do it because it was commonly accepted. That is why on the Israeli soldiers' uniforms, on the patch is a snake. Any of you who watched Rabin's funeral saw that the family was guarded by a special unit with black patches and a snake going up their arm. Because they're the only group that won't go along with the program. And the irony of the whole thing is that they were created by the Illuminati in the first place. They kind of went insane. Just like the United States. The United States was a creation of the Illuminati in the first place that got too big for its britches, and now they have to take it down a peg or two. They have to make the United States into a typical third world country like everybody else. And that's what they're going to do. And so they're creating a situation in the Middle East with the Chinese on one side and the Israelis on the other side, destroying everything in the middle. And just 6 months ago, the Israelis signed an arms deal with the Chinese, giving them nuclear capabilities in missiles that can travel over 3,000 miles. And what's not known in general to the United Nations or to the United States, who's only in the newspaper once, most people don't know that Western China is not Oriental. The indigenous population of Xinjiang province in the West is Persian, and they're Muslim. And they're rebelling against the Chinese and blowing up their buses and their stores, and any Chinese national that lives in this area is under attack. So the Chinese are moving troops into Western China to put down the rebellion. This is upsetting the people in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan and all the little stands that used to be part of the Soviet Republic that also happen to have all the nuclear missiles that are left over. And they're giving arms and weapons to the Persians who live in Western China. So that's going to blow up any day now. Okay? And so when that happens, what do you think will happen? Then the Pakistanis will get involved in helping the Muslims, and then the Iranians and the Afghanistanis and the Iraqis will all just be one big soup boiling up. And then they'll say, let's go after Israel too. And then the Israelis will attack them. And then you'll have the Chinese and the Israelis using the same weapons sweeping right across to the middle. And that's what will happen. This will create a global situation, World War III, where everyone will say, all the countries, we have to unite to eliminate this threat. Let's have one world government. Oh, it already exists. Here it is. It's in the United Nations, who is controlled by the 13 families. And that's what's happening right now. Iran just attacked Iraq a few weeks ago. Pakistan and India are fighting. Afghanistan has disappeared practically. Okay? Look and see what's happening. But most Americans have blinders on. They care about if their car payment will be made, if they can buy the house and get that mortgage, if they'll get a promotion in their job, if the gas prices will go down. That's what they don't care about what's going on in the Middle East. They don't care about what Queen Elizabeth does at her ceremonies. They don't care. They won't care about their pockets and their credit, which, by the way, you're going to have soon no cash society. That's being tested out in Finland now. When you go to Finland, you give them all your money, and they give you a card that says what the value is that you could spend in Finland. It's a cashless society, and that's what will be promulgated everywhere else. They will create a global situation that will require as a solution a united government of the world in order to solve the problem.
How does global warming...
Oh, that's a very good... Yeah, that's a very good point. In 1994, you all remember the String of Pearls comet that struck Jupiter. That was a comet that supposedly broke into 22 pieces and did right-angled turns, turning around Jupiter and striking it in strategic places like comets always do. Okay? Now, I was working at that time at a naval base in Philadelphia, and I was asked at that time to translate from the language of hyperspace archetypes that were being transmitted to the Earth. I think I put that in my Alien Connection book, which I don't know if any of you have read. And at that time, the Earth was being bombarded with archetype symbols, which I talk about in the Healer's Handbook over here. And I was one of the few people that was able to translate this. And that's why I was given that job. What they did was create a situation where Jupiter, which is a gas giant, it's not a solid object, they've heated it up. Whatever was in that comet, or those pieces of mechanisms that they sent in there, are creating Jupiter into being a second sun. And that is heating up the solar system. It is also melting the frozen moons around Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune to make them inhabitable. And in the last year or two, you've seen articles in the newspaper saying that the moons of those planets are like frozen Earths with oceans and maybe life in them. And if they were defrosted, they could be inhabited. It was in the newspaper. Well, that's what they're doing. And the Earth will become part of a binary star system, heated up, and life on Earth will be conducive to reptilian life form. And human beings that are left will be sent to colonize these unfrozen worlds as slave labor. No. And so people say to me, you didn't give us much hope. Might as well kill myself now. But that's not the answer. The answer is, you are the hope. If you are able to control your own mind pattern and take control of your own victim mentality, then those who control this planet will not have control over you. And if you then teach that to other people, and they teach it to other people, and there's a chain like that, it can reach a critical mass that will spill over to the rest of the population, that will then stop and prevent the occupation and the tyranny from occurring. But if we leave the victim mentality in place, then you will have an oppressor all the time, of one form or another. And that's the answer. There's always hope, but it has to come from you. Contrary to New Age beliefs, there are no benevolent aliens coming to save you. And I always talk about that scene, which is one of my favorite scenes from Independence Day, where all the New Age people are on the roof with their signs saying, "Welcome, Space Brothers." And they're the first ones that got blasted away. That's a message to you. That's a message to you. Okay? Don't welcome someone who's not invited. Yes? You must be the group spokesperson.
I would think that it would be very, the major concern that have with the whole planet is the number of guns in the United States.
I'm sorry, can you repeat
The
that?
number of guns that exist in the United States in the hands of the citizens,
Mm-hmm.
that has to be a very, very big concern for them.
That is why they create situations to make people afraid to have handguns out there. That's why they create situations like Littleton, Colorado.
But there are more guns in the United States than there are people.
And that will change. And that will change. Because there will come a time when they will actually do door-to-door searches because you will have no more rights and they'll see what you have. And in fact, the United Nations is giving a poll to U.S. soldiers. And some of the questions on the poll is, if you are asked to put on a UN uniform and defend the United Nations, would you do so? If the United Nations commander asked you to shoot an American citizen for not obeying an order, would you do so? And on and on and on like that. And if they answer yes, they will do it, those are the promoted ones. And that's what's going on.
See, the other thing, as I understand, there are a lot of camps throughout the United States where supposedly UN troops are being...
That's what I was just talking about before.
But they're there to be occupied.
Invade this country.
Yeah.
And the invasion will come generally from Canada. Not by Canadian troops who already are stationed in the U.S., but by Chinese, Russian, and German. It's already in process. In fact, those of you who are knowledgeable of planetary geology and also astronomy, note that since '94, the big red spot in Jupiter is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Because as it heats up, that storm dissipates, and you're going to see Jupiter starting to glow like a golden yellow color. It probably will take until the year 2010 to be completed. Yes?
They're already putting on entrance to the national parks that they have international biosphere, and now they're putting symbols of the UN.
Yeah. They're designated as United Nations parks and recreation areas. Mm-hmm.
Or mankind, heritage for mankind.
Exactly, but it's under the auspices of the United Nations.
Why is that?
Because there is no United States really anymore.
Independence Hall is also...
Yeah, Independence Hall has been declared an international site. Yes?
Could you comment on the shifting of the Earth's axis and the
Yes.
shifting of the poles?
Yeah, that's really not going to happen. The Earth's axis is not going to shift. The magnetic poles have shifted. And it's now somewhere over northern Canada. The Earth will not flip on its axis. That is a disinformation, so that people will move and there'll be a population shift to rural areas so they can be developed. And that's what's happened. You will not be able to hide anywhere. If you go to northern Canada, top of a mountain, middle of the ocean, it doesn't matter. The Earth is ringed by satellites that can catch a fly on your shoulder. That's how detailed they are. You cannot escape from it. And neither can you fight against it. But you can change it. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. It'll be right here in this room.